it's also represents the time period just in the filmmaking, particularly the score. Is that kind of
It's all jazzy
computerized,
saxophone, baby.
but it's all like computerized jazzy saxophone. Like they're not. It's definitely not real saxophone. It's very much like how the Seinfeld bass.
I don't know. It was 94. Are we certain that it wasn't Bill Clinton doing it? The entirety of the score was filmed on the Arsenio Hall show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Mikiah.
And I'm Kyle. This is a movie of the week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we talk about their context and quality. This week I've selected the 1994 documentary Hoop Dreams. Hoop Dreams follows NBA hopefuls William Gates and Arthur Agee Jr. as they navigate their way through high school basketball and academics in metropolitan Chicago, rather. Whatever.
Kind of the outskirts.
Yeah, exactly. Chicago, big city, so...
It is a big city, yes.
The film is directed by Steve James and earned immense critical acclaim when it came out. Originally intended as a PBS special, it grossed $11 million on a $700,000 budget. Currently the 100th highest grossing documentary of all time. It earned $24 million in today's money. It also received an Oscar nomination for Best Film Editing. So, Mikiah, what did you think of Hoop Dreams?
Well, Kyle, you've managed to once again pick a movie off of my ever-growing, never-ending bucket list of movies to watch. And
you're welcome once again.
Yes, I am very thankful that you've given me this assignment.
Aha, Thanksgiving! Thankful!
Oh, yes, because it is Thanksgiving week, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So, but yeah, no, this is, it's a 3-hour long documentary, so that's mainly the reason that I never watched it. I do like documentaries quite a bit, but I'm never drawn to them in the same way as I am to just fiction. I read fiction, I watch fiction. I don't really read a lot of nonfiction, and I try to watch more and more nonfiction because there are many great documentaries out there.
It's definitely a topic to topic thing. You've got to be passionate about the topic in order to like sit down for 3 hours and actually enjoy watching it.
Yeah.
I could see that.
And a good documentary will like convince you that you actually do like this thing halfway through, at some point in the movie. I am interested.
Or it'll be so broad that it'll cover a wide variety of topics where you can find something to latch onto and enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've enjoyed, because Hannah likes documentaries a lot, so she gets annoyed when I watch one without her. She's like, "You watched a documentary without me?" So, but yeah, it's been good getting to watch some of these, and this has definitely been like the top of the list as far as documentaries go for me.
Right.
And I understand why it's so well loved. There's a lot of, it's very of its time, because documentaries always are, as are all films, as we've talked about
before.
Are
everything.
Yes, as is everything that's created is of its time.
Everything is.
But for a documentary, it is more explicitly capturing the time period, and I think that that's one of the more engaging parts, because obviously when it came out, it was of the modern day, and now it's very much, we look at it, and this is the 90s and the late 80s is what it's representing here. And there are plenty of films that I think of that in that period of time that are like definitive movies of the time, and this one really feels like one of those, like a Do the Right Thing, like even something like White Men Can't Jump just is so quintessential 90s, it just couldn't really exist anywhere else in time and space. I think that's where it belongs.
I think something as well, because the two subjects of the movie are in their formative years, coming out of a junior high or a middle school equivalent, and then going straight into high school and then worrying about the things with that. It's very formative for them, and it's also kind of they're taking on the world, and they're seeing how things change in the world, as well as in the 90s things were changing. Obviously the Soviet Union fell during this time, and many things were changing in politics and in history at that time. So it's kind of interesting to see another side of you're not looking at the history specifically of the 90s. You're not even looking at the basketball necessarily of the 90s. You're looking at what the people were going through of the 90s.
Right, right. And it's specifically these two families and these two kids of Arthur Agee and William Gates.
Yes.
And so you get like a really up close look at these two people. And I kind of like, I was surprised that they didn't like intersect more in their lives. There are a few moments here and there where you do see them together on screen.
Yeah, they meet up after the state championships, in which
Yeah.
Marshall Arthur Agee's team competes. They meet up there. They were obviously they weren't so teammates freshman year. They were both freshmen at the time when William Gates was in the varsity St. Joseph's team, and Arthur Agee was not. But obviously they knew each other then, so they probably talked on and off for those 5 years. But yeah, they
Yeah.
didn't capture a lot of that. I suspect. I mean, going to different schools, you probably and your acquaintances, but I don't know that they were necessarily friends at that time. The documentary definitely doesn't show that they were, but it's possible they could have been.
Yeah, but I think that that ends up being a benefit to the movie because
Hmm.
just capturing these two people's lives, and I understand why it evolved to become more than what it was originally planned as like a 30-minute special kind of thing, and then becoming this. They have hundreds of hours of footage of this
Over five
because,
years.
yeah, over 5 years, because you get these two very distinct people and these two family units, very different situations going on, despite the fact that from the outside it looks so similar. And that's what really, I think, makes the film what it is getting multiple perspectives on something that from the outside somebody might think of as just being the same almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, this is a great film. This really is. If you haven't seen Hoop Dreams and you've been putting it off because you're like, do I want to watch a 3 hour 90s documentary about kids who played basketball? Yes, you do. You do want to watch that. So it's a great film.
Just like Network, even though it definitely has aged and there are differences, this is still very much something that is necessary to watch if you are. I would say high schoolers can absolutely benefit from a film like this. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and it's such a, I always say this just in life, that just high school is just such a hotbed of culture. It is so, like, you just take whatever the culture is at the time and you just condense it and pack it all into one building. And that's really what high school is to some extent. And so getting this picture, this look at, so they both go to St. Joseph's, but Arthur has to leave because the scholarship wasn't exactly what they thought it was, and they ended up owing a lot of money that they couldn't pay. So they
right.
had to take him out of that school. Whereas William Gates had a full scholarship and he was on the varsity team. And so because of that, he got to
He had a
stay.
full ride basically from a financial foster family, you could
Yes.
call it.
Yeah. So they paid for everything for him. So he got to stay at the school, which means that Arthur then had to enroll in public school and be on a public school basketball team and all of that stuff. And it's with documentaries, you are kind of taking a chance, especially on something like this, with what direction it's going to go, because life is not written, you know.
No,
And so I think they got really lucky too with the subjects that they followed and just kind of the diverting paths, both in just, like I said, their family stuff being different, but even in like the sports journey that they're on, where William Gates's ultimate high school sports journey is a little bit disappointing, despite the fact that he seems to have the better scenario for his life in that situation of having the full ride and everything, which still gives him more opportunities with the schools he wants to go to and everything. But he ends up tearing his knee, and then their season ends
several
shorter.
times. He
A
injures
few, yeah,
himself several times, and I think
yeah,
just as well. I think I cannot remember if Arthur Agee ever gets injured. I think it might have been like minor injuries compared to, of course,
yeah,
William Gates tearing like ligaments, or I think he tears like cartilage in his knee. But
yeah,
I think the difference is as well, if Arthur Agee had had the same injuries, his career might have been done completely. Because
right,
William Gates, not only with the scholarship and everything like that, his mother could save up money, and she eventually becomes a nurse because of that. Or no, sorry, Arthur Agee's mom becomes a nurse, but William Gates's mother doesn't have as much financial burden, not only because of the tuition, the scholarship, but also because of the health insurance. So all of
yeah,
the surgeries and everything are paid for by by the financial foster family, which gives William Gates so much more of an opportunity, even with re-injuring his knee several
Yeah.
times. So
Because Arthur Agee on his team, they end up kind of going the distance with it. They don't end up winning the whole tournament, but they get to the end of it basically.
right, yeah, they make
And
it all the way to the final.
yeah, so you get a really good just sports story there of this team that's never done this well before, and him kind of leading it um, in terms of scoring and everything.
Not only that, but you get a great scene between Arthur Agee's parents and another group of parents at like a fast food restaurant. They're talking about the fact that their school had not won a championships and or a state championship since like 1980 or something like that. And they're like, "Oh, we've never even been down here." So yeah, it's that kind of like two underdog stories or two very overlooked teams meeting together in the finals, and one
Right.
team eventually has to win it all. So, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty of sports, at least for amateur sports like high school basketball or like a college football. In my opinion, is not so much the tribalism that comes from like rivalries and that kind of thing. It's more so the stories and
Yeah.
the opportunity that is given to athletes, I'd
Yeah,
say.
a little context for me is that tribalism that you just brought up really has turned me off to sports over the years. My brother's really into sports, so
Which
I
I
would
completely
watch things
understand.
around. Yeah, and I love playing sports. I played basketball growing up for years on different rec teams um and yeah, I love playing basketball. I'm not the most competitive person in the world, so I was never going to be the best at it because I wasn't going to be the person digging and doing all the stuff that you need to do to be great. But I definitely enjoy it. However, I've not watched sports over the years. I know really nothing about the actual industry of sports and all of that kind of stuff. So this movie was a nice little insight, but I'm also not typically drawn into like sports movies very much. However, the thing I do appreciate about sports are those stories.
Yeah.
And I understand why it's such a popular thing and why it is so ripe for storytellers to come in and tell those stories. And I think getting it in a documentary format, in a real life format, is much more compelling to me than a narratively like fictionalized version of a real story, because that always comes across as a little false to me, whereas this just it feels completely honest, and those stories alone, just as they are untouched, are compelling and worth investing yourself in it.
But they're not quite untouched, are they? Because they can edit around exactly what they
Yeah,
want the narrative to be, kind of. Obviously,
they
they
can.
can't film somebody burying a buzzer beater to win the game. They can't write that, but they can capture that, and then they can show that as the like a climax to the
Yeah,
movie. So they treat free throws often in this movie as like late game free throws, kind of at the end of the game where it's pivotal. They treat that as like the climax to a scene, which is smart to do because basketball does lend a decent amount of games that are played to that kind of narrative based sport.
yeah,
Whereas some sports, I will say, like cricket, try making a documentary about cricket when it's multiple hours long and teams can run up the score, like they can beat a team tenfold, or something like football to the rest of the world, soccer. But obviously, like a late game goal or an equalizer and that kind of thing, making it to penalty kicks, that is like the climax to a game, or the game can end in a tie, and it's not very climactic. So
yeah,
with basketball, somebody's got to win, and for the most part, sometime or basketball more so than not can like lead to those very tense games that will end on something that is climactic, like free throws, which they show in this. And I think that's why a documentary based on this is probably better than if you're doing, yeah, sports as like a fictional movie, is because some people going into it who don't know that sports can be climactic, some people going into it will just think, oh, this is contrived. This doesn't make sense, like it being so close, or like the underdogs being able to win. But
yeah.
it happens all the time in sports. So as a documentary, I can see it being more accessible for people to enjoy that don't necessarily like sports. So I think that's a
Yeah,
strength for this movie.
for sure, absolutely. It's just a great human story. getting these people, and you really get close up with their families and everything. I like too that it doesn't dwell on certain things that I think a lesser filmmaker would have
Yeah,
done
it moves
in
on.
this
It
setting.
moves quick
Yeah,
for
like
3 hours.
for instance, Arthur's dad leaves the family and gets hooked on drugs,
I
and
guess we'll refer to him as Bo.
Bo, yeah. Bo, he leaves the family, he gets hooked on drugs, all of that stuff. And
Goes to
that's just
jail.
something that happens. And the movie doesn't dwell on that, the fact that that happened. They acknowledge that it happened.
It's
And
like a
you get to see
2 second
him
narration.
again. Yeah. And then you see him again come in as he's just kind of getting more drugs at one point in the middle there. And then you see him when he comes back into the family. Um, and so but it doesn't like, yeah, it doesn't make that the story.
No,
William has a kid in between, like, I guess filming at some
I
point.
think it was. I think it was like sophomore or junior year
He has a
between
kid
that.
when he's like 16 or 17 years old,
Yeah,
and that could have become the movie, but that's not at all what the movie is. That is an aspect of this person's life. It is not this person's life.
right.
And so I think that there was really smart decisions being made in um the filmmaking and the editorial process to get these stories to be about their whole lives and not dwell on something that could be, you know, its own kind of thing. Derail it for the sake of drama, I guess.
Yeah, the natural conclusion to the stories of William Gates and Arthur Agee is at least finishing college basketball and then maybe making the NBA.
Yeah,
So
that's both their
that is the
goals.
logical conclusion of what was going to happen there, even though it didn't happen in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's you also get the two different perspectives too of the Arthur has to go through this. He wants to play basketball more than anything in the world, and he wants to be in the NBA more than anything in the world, and he just doesn't have the opportunities.
Right.
And when he thought he did for a minute when he went to St. Joseph, but that got taken away, then he has to fight his way through this public school system in getting through to that, which is, to get good schools to give him attention and everything.
Yeah,
And then
he had to go to basically a community college,
yeah,
work there for 10 or work there for 2 years, mostly academically. Obviously, he's still going to be playing basketball, but he has to work there academically so that he can transfer to a Division 1 school and get the best
yeah,
opportunity to make it in the NBA and increase his draft stock.
yeah. And then on the other hand, William Gates, who also has deep passion for basketball, you kind of watch it get beat out of him over the time, probably both due to his injuries, but the guy, his coach at St. Joseph, is very much a Fletcher from Whiplash type guy,
Yes.
who I think is going to push you as
Agreed.
hard as he can, because if you to become the best, you need to be pushed that hard,
Yeah.
which is a debatable thing. I kind of hated him watching the movie. I was like, I hate this
Well,
guy. These are kids.
yes. It's one of those kind of things where St. Joseph's is known. Obviously, Isaiah Thomas went there, and he's an NBA star.
Yeah, he
So
basically built a shrine to him
he's
inside the
yep,
school.
he's holding the prestige that comes with an NBA star and one of the best in the game coming from your school and coming from your mentorship. He's holding that,
Yeah.
and he's trying to make it as real as possible for as long as possible. So it is also one of those things. If you are a high school where NBA scouts come to your school looking for talent, then you are going to want to kind of filter out the players that don't have the talent or don't have the drive to become as talented or become as
Yeah.
skilled as other players. So that's what obviously his approach is not the best, but I see both sides. Obviously William
Yeah.
Gates is not responding to that, and that's his decision. If he doesn't respond to that positively, I don't think I don't think a coach that doesn't push him as much as his coach did, I don't think he would still have the drive to do it. I think it's a
Yeah.
combination of family life, academics, and the coach that led to him losing his drive. I
Yeah.
suspect that's the case. Just
Yeah.
everything piling on him, which is understandable because when when you have a brother who didn't make the NBA and also kind of failed at college basketball because he was uncoachable, or that's the way that the documentary
Yeah,
portrayed that.
frames it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the way that the documentary portrayed that. If you are the younger sibling and you have the opportunity to not only go to a prestigious college, Division 1 college for basketball, but also if you're good enough and if you have that drive and that work ethic, you can absolutely make it to the NBA. Then
yeah,
yeah, it's going to be a hell of a lot of pressure on you. So
yeah. The whole brother angle is a really interesting one in the movie because of his brother being in a similar situation with similar talent, but not making it. Like his dreams didn't happen for him. Whether his own undoing was from himself or the system in place,
I think it's
either
a
way,
combination of like
a
everything.
combination.
Yeah.
Yeah. But either way, he's put all of his hopes and dreams on his younger brother,
Yeah.
which is a massive amount of pressure to
Yep.
come from that. And it seems like he was getting that from all angles, not just his brother, but his brother being one of the major sources of that. And I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, I guess I could just bring up the fact that so a sad fact is both families suffered losses after this movie, which was not
Mm.
covered by the documentary. So Curtis Williams' brother was murdered in 2001, and AG's father was murdered in 2004. So
Oh, yeah.
they yeah, even after, and I think it's like thrown in at the end of the documentary, but Arthur was mugged on the streets in Chicago, like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, they
that's when
did
he
say that
decided.
in the
Yeah,
documentary.
and that's when he decided I absolutely just need to get out of this town.
Yeah.
So um
Didn't he play in Canada
yeah,
after
he did.
college?
He played for a Canadian, I think, semi-pro league. So that's better than most. That's
Yeah.
honestly still saying something. And it's important to note as well. I told Mikiah this beforehand, but William Gates did work out with Michael Jordan when Jordan was a director of basketball operations for the Washington Wizards. So that's also more than most. So
Right.
they were still talented individuals when it came to basketball. I think it's just the unfortunate nature of some of the opportunities falling flat, or maybe it's because the work ethic you need to get into the NBA is insane, because you need to not only be skilled, but you need to drive to be skilled for 20
Yeah.
years in
It's a
order to make it
combination of
into the NBA.
drive. Yeah, a combination of drive and luck and
Drive, luck,
opportunity.
work ethic, or
Yeah.
talent.
And
You
yeah.
obviously need like you obviously need height. That is like the bare minimum of
Right.
what you need, but you need talent, which can come from genetics and it can come from drive, but you need talent, work ethic, and luck, basically.
And yeah, just opportunity as well
Hmm.
is part of it too. So, cuz like we said, William Gates, he had multiple injuries in his high school thing and his team did not make it as far in the finals as Arthur's did. However, because of where he was, because of the opportunities he had being at the school that he was and the scholarship that he still had much better options for his schooling, his education.
This is another thing that if you cover sports generally, or if you look at sports generally, you'll see a lot of people reacting to injuries in different ways. So when, say, for instance, is a March Madness team in college makes a gigantic run for the championship and then loses a key couple players in the last few months, that's going to affect the way that they think about, oh, we could have won this championship if it hadn't been for this injury or that, or
Mm-hmm.
this person fouling out and this person not, and that kind of thing. I suspect that there was some kind of thing with William. They talk about he was late to one game, one very important game, and he
Yeah.
was sidelined for a couple minutes. And that affected the game. It did affect the game. Whether they were going to win, we can't say, but it did affect the
Yeah.
game. Same thing with all of his injuries. That absolutely affected their seasons in junior and senior year whenever he was injured. That absolutely affected the game. So it's just
Yeah.
that kind of what if scenario that always
Yeah.
happens with sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
I realize that we haven't really been talking about like what the documentary did. We're mostly talking about the subject of the documentary, but that's the whole point of a documentary.
Right. And the
If it
subject
can get you
here,
enthralled and immersed into the subject of the documentary, it did its job. So,
yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, it's just following their lives as they're going
right.
through these things over the years and just kind of in this area of Chicago that they're in. And yeah, you really get wrapped up in the hopes and dreams of these kids. Just, you really, I don't know. I was watching and I just was like, I don't know the outcome because I didn't look it up beforehand, but I was just like, I hope that they make it, what one way or another. And it sounds like to some extent they did. Maybe not the way that they were hoping for ultimately for
Right.
their dreams, but it seems like they did still manage to push themselves to get their lives in a different place than maybe they saw it going originally, based on their circumstances and the opportunities that they were dealt.
And obviously we can we're not speaking for them after this documentary, but I suspect because of the fact that I know AG started an inner city youth program promoting
Yeah.
higher education for basketball players and that kind of thing. And both of them have families now. I suspect they're not worse off
Oh, yeah.
because of everything. It's just one of those things. I would tagline this movie knowing what I know today. I would call it the beauty of dreams and the brutality of real life. So
Yeah.
that that kind of captures it all for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah. Yeah, and there's also the question of like within documentary filmmaking, like you said, it's not a completely hands-off thing whenever they're portraying things. There was a point where their power went out at Arthur's home. They didn't have any more power to be able to, they couldn't afford their bill for it. But apparently the filmmakers stepped up and paid their bill for that period of time while they were filming
Yeah.
and stuff like that. That having even just this kind of access, it's like um what do you do in that situation as a filmmaker?
Yeah.
you know
It's an impossible situation for me.
yeah,
Um I is is there a right thing to do? Sure, but how do you know what the right thing to do in that situation is?
yeah, which is a lot of what this movie is, because I mean, William is navigating a relationship with the mother of his child and having a child and thinking about his own career, going to college, all of that stuff. There's a point where they're arguing over, like, he's saying that I need to be able to go to, and do all of this stuff. He's like, and take care of the kid. She's like, I'm going to college and taking care of the kid,
Right.
um, at the same time. It's just, it's really unprecedented access to these people that just highlights a lot of stuff. And like I said, it's very much of the time, and like some of the approach in the filmmakers. There's one point where they um call African American or black students, they just call them blacks in the movie, just to refer to, like, there were X number of blacks at the school or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of like, that's a little bit like, ooh, just of the time kind of language stuff happening. But it's honestly really careful in its depictions, I believe, of everything overall.
I would say more so honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when it does that, it's referring to the fact that, and I can't remember exactly what community college he was at. I think it was like Missouri or something like that, a school in Missouri. Arthur AG is he is in a basically a townhouse for all the black students that are basketball players, and of the seven black students at that community college, six of them are in that residence. So
Right.
it's purely because the they are enrolling black students is because of the fact that they are basketball players, essentially.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's highlighting that. It's just kind of funny, like hearing the language being, like how language has evolved over time. Because when that came out, maybe that wasn't such a thing, but now it's like a little bit of like, oh, they could have phrased that differently,
Yeah.
But it's very, very minor things. This is kind of like that
Also,
of its
blacks is
time
not the
quality.
preferred nomenclature, dude. African American,
Right,
please.
right. Which now isn't true.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's always changing. Um,
Well, I mean, Elon Musk is an African American, so what? How do you navigate that?
do we have to invoke his name?
Okay, I can blur it out. I'll censor it.
Ugh.
Oh,
But
Charlize
yeah,
Theron. Charlize Theron is an African American.
there you go. We can invoke her name.
All day long, baby.
What else do you want to talk about? We're only at 30 minutes.
Honestly, there's not much because of the fact that the movie really speaks for itself, or the documentary really
It
speaks for
does,
itself.
as they do, like literally.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't leave it. It feels like it doesn't leave much. It goes over everything quite thoroughly because it never it skips, but it doesn't linger. So it can cover everything in those 3 hours that it needs to, or
Yeah,
that happened during that time because it has to. So
yeah, yeah, and I think it's also represents the time period just in the filmmaking, particularly the score. Is that kind of
it's all jazzy
computerized,
saxophone, baby.
but it's all like computerized jazzy
That's
saxophone.
true.
Like they're not.
It's
It's
very
definitely
synthy.
not real saxophone.
No,
It's
yeah.
very much like how the Seinfeld bass is
I don't know. It
just a
was
keyboard.
94. Are we certain that it wasn't Bill Clinton doing it?
Oh, you know what? Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
The
But
entirety
yeah,
of
it's
the
got
score
that.
was filmed on the Arsenio Hall show.
Yeah, absolutely.
The score was filmed in front of a live audience. Wait, what?
Is that true?
No. But
What?
if it
Oh, I
was
thought
the
you were. I
Arsenio
thought you were
Hall,
reading something. I
no,
thought you were reading something right
that,
now. The score. Okay, I see what you're doing.
no, that's just my narration voice.
Yes, classic Kyle narration voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, once again, before we get to scoring, just like once again, it's a great film.
Go
It's a
watch this.
wonderful documentary. If you have any interest in sports, absolutely watch it.
If you went to
Especially if
high
you
school,
like
go watch
basketball.
this. That
If
covers
you went to
most
high
people.
school, yeah, go watch it. If you're interested in human experiences, go watch it. If you are interested in um like the 90s and just kind of what it was like to be an inner city in the 90s, go watch it. Just watch it. It's great. So, yeah, I think that are you ready to move into scoring then for
I am
this one?
absolutely. Let's discuss. So, scoring is always a 0 to 2, 0 being poor, 1 being good, 2 being great. We keep it vague on purpose. That way, it starts a conversation, doesn't really finish it. This wouldn't be the score that we would give it, nor the score that we think it actually is individually or as a whole. So,
Yeah. And also, this is a documentary, and we
mhm.
usually go across our 10 categories, and they don't all apply in the same way to a documentary that they would to a regular narrative film.
Yeah,
And so we're going to do the scoring a little bit differently.
yeah.
Did you want to just focus on those last 5 categories?
I think that would be best because of the fact that so our categories typically are writing, and that usually deals with plot, dialogue, and themes. World building, which obviously it deals with a little bit of the art direction, what the movie chooses to show, and how the movie shows the world on camera and as a whole in the story. Characters, which is obviously characterization, the arcs of characters, directing, which is performances of acting as well as general kind of movie making as a whole from the director's point of view. Acting, which is self evident, whether the actors performed in a way that is both relatable and believable. Visuals, which we're going to stick onto. Visuals, editing, sound, genre, and impact, we're going to stick onto because those are applicable to this. When it comes to writing, world building, characters, directing, and acting, those things don't really apply to documentaries because of the fact that it requires at least a story narrative that is made up for the movie specifically, or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. If we were going to characterize this as a written movie, it would be more so as like an edited movie because they shot hundreds of hours worth of footage and then they condensed it down to 3 hours. So
Yeah,
what
more
they,
so than
yeah,
yeah, even regular films, documentaries are made in the editing
mhm.
completely. That's where you get to make your story. And so obviously you don't write out a story because you're following life and whatever that leads you down. So it's not written, but the editing and even directing, I wouldn't say is the major focus of documentaries at all. Like there are occasional documentaries that have a big emphasis there, usually if they're trying to like portray something separately or do visualizations and stuff like that. But in this case, this is very much a matter of fact. We're just shooting these subjects in their homes, in standard environments. We're not trying to do dynamic filmmaking here. We're just presenting life as it is. So it's really the editing.
Sometimes they
Yeah.
do. Sometimes, say for William Gates's high school graduation, that crazy shot of in between the students coming in, and then it turns around to show the entirety of the theater, I guess, or wherever it was set. That kind of thing is kind of like a direction. However, it probably is more so for visuals than it is for like directing
Yeah,
for
there's
us.
definitely direction involved in documentary filmmaking.
Yeah.
For sure. I'm not discrediting
I
that,
mean,
but
this
for the
did win a
purposes.
Directors Guild Award for Best Direction for Documentaries.
Right.
So,
Right. It's just, but there's a reason that they have it separated from the main directing categories, whereas for editing, they don't.
right.
So that's kind of, I guess, what I'm getting at with it. So for the sake of comparing it to the rest of our show, I think it's best to leave out directing for it too.
I think that's fair. So we're just going to go with 5. So it would be 0 to 10 now
Yeah,
is
0
our
to
score.
10. With visuals, editing, sound, genre, and impact
Which
being our categories.
if you want, we can make a whole new list for specifically for documentaries, or we could double the score and make it.
Do 4, like go to make each one up to 4.
No. I mean, like whatever we have out of 10, just double the final outcome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can do it either way.
Yeah.
It's fine. I feel like we're pretty loose with the scoring anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
So...
This is not set in stone.
All right, we spent enough time talking about how we're doing it. Let's just talk about it.
Okay, so we're starting with visuals, yes?
Visuals. Yes, which we watched different versions of it. I
That is
watched
correct.
this on streaming on Max, and it was not the highest quality version of it. You said you watched a remastered version of it, which I'm sure.
I watched the remastered, was it Criterion?
Yeah.
I watched the remastered version of it, which is also less cropped out. So it's kind of like what the original film
Mm,
would have looked like if the technology
yeah.
had not hindered it. I don't know how
Mine
much
was
you want to.
definitely 4:3, like
Yeah,
in terms of its aspect
yeah,
ratio.
and that
So
can really hinder some shots. Like I actually go back and watch old basketball um full games, and you can definitely tell it's of the technology is of the time.
yeah.
So, but like watching remastered full games is a lot better. And the 90s had the 80s and 90s had some of the best basketball games in the NBA. So, being able to watch a remastered version is amazing. And it's crazy the technology that we have
Yeah.
able to remaster full full length videos like that are 3 hours long.
Yeah.
But it's really
Yeah.
cool. I will say if we're judging this based, and I did watch the 4:3 original version, but that was years ago. So I will take a back seat to your
Um
judgment on this.
Well, I'm kind of feeling this the opposite. Like because you watched this version of it that is a more optimized version of it. I think the filmmakers do a really great job of just capturing reality and not trying to accentuate it at all.
Mm-hmm.
They do have this great access to their living spaces and everything for these interviews. They're very basically structured interviews. But I mean, just being so there's a clarity to the presentation here that really makes the time period feel very alive. Um, and I think that
It feels like you're there.
yeah, that aspect of it in a documentary, because we're rating all these things on documentary scale because it doesn't like if I were to rate this next to a film that's going for dramatized lighting and everything, it might not be the same kind of comparison, but the way that this movie looks, I would compare it almost more to like we talked about with Network, where they went for very natural lighting at and as it goes on, it gets less and less natural, but there are plenty of scenes that go for a very natural look.
Yeah, it sometimes gets
Um,
more dramatized, but specifically to
towards it,
to
yeah.
what the writing entails.
Exactly. This one, it's I don't know. I feel like it captures life in such a way that
It's
I would
real
be
to a
willing to give it a
fault.
2.
It's
Yeah.
it's somehow too real.
Yeah. I mean, I think that documentaries sometimes have a problem of looking too clean,
Yeah.
and I don't think this has that problem at all. So even though I watched it on a lesser version of it, like it felt like I should be watching it on CRT.
Oh yeah.
I was, I still felt immersed in it
The back of
because
the
of
TV
it.
should be 2 feet long minimum.
Well, I'm looking at like a tiny CRT and it's at least a foot and a half deep.
Yeah, there you go. There you
And
go.
it's just the little one on this desk that
Perfect.
I'm at. Yeah, so I give the visuals a 2 for a documentary.
I think that's fair, and I think I can definitely make the argument that if you're watching the remastered version, that was probably the intended version, but the
Yeah,
technology hindered it. And
same. That's
I
what
would
I'm
say that
thinking.
the remastered version absolutely looks terrific. It
Yeah.
looks outstanding for an early 90s camera crew and with a very small production value compared to what it could. It honestly looks like some of the games that they captured could have been NBA quality
Yeah.
when it comes to the way that they looked. And
Yeah.
going back, if you go back and watch full games, it kind of looks a little bit like the original version. So they definitely had that quality of camera work. So
Right.
it's crazy to me that they just filmed two young boys at two relatively unknown to the rest of America schools. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah. And the way they captured those games too, like I don't really love watching sports partly because they're captured in a way to best present all the visual information that you can
Hmm.
the most clearly. Whereas this isn't trying to do that. This is trying to capture specifically these two people and the games that they're playing.
Yeah, the
But through
narratives of the
this
games.
lens, yeah, through this lens, these games were presented in a really exciting way, both from my investment in these people and their stories, but also just like the fact that you're following these two individuals as they're playing basketball. You really get a lot of good like close-up shots, and the way it's edited through those games is really excellent.
You'll also notice that they skip ahead quite often when it came to the basketball season.
Yes.
They'll be like, "Oh, this is William Gates' first game back as a junior and that kind of thing," and the Saint Joseph is 1 and 2 or like 4 and 5, and then they cut immediately to the end of the season like 5 minutes later, and they're like 16 and
Yeah.
9 and that kind of thing. So yeah, they definitely skip ahead for the benefit of the climactic scenes. So
Yeah, it would be a lot. That's probably where a lot of like the footage is cut,
yeah,
is just like getting different sports
because
shots or
they
whatever.
absolutely covered every single game because every single game can
Yeah.
be a pivotal game.
I mean, I ran camera for lots of basketball games in college, and it is a tedious thing, just like doing it for a broadcast purpose, because you're literally just going back and forth,
Hmm.
like back and forth, just kind of on a swivel with like like the other one person's trying to zoom in on where the ball is and who's got the ball, and the other person's just trying to capture the whole game. And I love that this movie's, because it's a documentary, is not concerned with that, and part of that goes into the editing, but it's also smart because a lot of sports games from the outside don't look that interesting, honestly. It just looks like people running around.
It is just people running around.
Because it is. But once you throw in these personal stories and get some more
But
interesting angles on it,
yeah, the
yeah,
connections that you find, like going to a high school basketball game where your friend is the starting point guard, that can make a tedious game very interesting. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
about forming the connections with the people on the court or the school itself, which is
yeah,
where like college sports
yeah,
come into play.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, editing is the next category. So we've already been talking about the editing, just like in that, and just how documentaries are made in the editing room. And this movie got a nomination for best editing at the Oscars, just period, best editing of any movie that came out in 1994, which this was a big year. This had Pulp Fiction,
Hmm.
Forrest Gump, um you know
Shawshank.
quiz show, Shawshank Redemption. These are some like heavy hitting movies that were at the top of the pack that year, so to get an editing nomination is kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
Well, especially for a documentary,
absolutely.
which we haven't talked about it yet, but it didn't get nominated for best documentary that year. And after this, it kind of got exposed what exactly how they did the voting
Yeah,
process,
if you want
which
me to talk
led the
about this, or if
Academy.
you want to talk about
Yeah,
this.
here I'll just set it up. But so it led the Academy to change how they do the voting process because, frankly, it was garbage before for documentary films specifically. But yeah, if you want to talk about that in depth.
So they would every single one of the dozens of documentary committee, specifically for the Academy Awards, would sit in a theater and they would have flashlights. They would point the flashlights at the ceiling, and as they would show the documentary, they would watch it. And if they wanted to move on to the next documentary, they would point the flashlight at the screen. If there's a majority of flashlights on the screen, they would cut off the movie and go to the next one. This movie lasted 20 minutes. 20
Yeah.
minutes before they moved on.
Yeah, so they changed it since that came out. Part of it was because this was Roger Ebert, who's, you can like or dislike the way
Influential
he
man.
talks about movies, but
Yeah,
he is definitely the most famous film critic to ever exist.
absolutely.
He's reading his reviews is part of the reason that I got into film because I loved the way he talked about it, even when I completely disagree with him, which is often.
Yeah. Same with me,
And
but
so
I cannot deny that he is at least a good movie critic. So,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and he put this as his number one movie of the 90s. He picked it as his favorite movie of that year.
And he said it
Um,
to Martin Scorsese, who he was interviewing.
yeah. And so, but when he was really promoting this movie, both him and Siskel were promoting this movie a lot on their show, kind of at the height of its popularity, honestly. Um, that kind of also helped contribute to them reevaluating how they do this because there was an outcry after it got snubbed for documentary nomination. And if for people who don't know, most Oscar categories, so let's just say cinematography, the people who vote on the cinematography category are the cinematographers.
Yeah.
And then once it goes to vote for who wins, it goes to the whole Academy of body and everybody votes on it. So best editing, editors vote on who gets nominated for best editing, and so on and so forth. That wasn't the case for documentaries for some reason. They changed it, so now that is the case. Now documentarians are the ones who are voting on documentary films for the best documentary category. But yeah, before this, that wasn't the case, and that's certainly why it didn't get nominated there.
Yeah. They gave
But
it
editors
20
voted
minutes.
for it.
They gave it
Yeah.
they gave it 20 minutes and they decided, "You know what? This is not going to make it."
It's like that's basically them being like documentaries aren't that important. Is like that method of voting for things
Yeah.
is awful. That's clearly a big flaw. Which is always that thing we talk about of taking awards bodies with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, editing I think is an easy two. I think they do a great job at balancing. They always seem to know when to go to the other person. If they've been following Arthur for a while, they always seem to know when to go back to William
Yeah.
and then back to Arthur, just right when it seems like it's most important to do so. And also, we already talked about the basketball games, knowing when to put in those games, the actual games, and then which games to not really show to really heighten the drama of it. Because we don't need to watch every single game in their season.
No.
So we don't need to know about the scoring as it's going on.
But just like a quick, this
Yeah.
is like the second last game of the season. They are almost in the playoffs, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just like giving a quick narration thing is perfectly fine.
Yeah. If this was a narrative, you'd get like a dueling montage of both of their seasons going on at the same time and really trying to like build that up in a certain way. But I love that. Yeah, that's not the focus.
All
of this
set to
movie.
push it to the limit.
some cheesy song for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think editing's an easy two.
Push it to the limit.
All right. Sound is a little bit of a subjective one. You watched a different version of this
Correct.
movie than I did. And that may have come with the remastered audio track as well. I don't know that for sure though.
I have no doubt that they at least touched the sound and audio quality.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they probably cleaned it up a bit.
Yeah.
It's a pretty standard sounding movie. It's recorded, it sounds like what it was originally intended as, a PBS kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I wouldn't say sound is something that the movie does terrifically. The score is a little cheesy, and of its time in a way that
Yeah.
I think is a little cheesy.
I wouldn't
So
even
for
say that
me,
it's good of its time. It's just saxophone every now and then is
right, right.
basically the score.
So I would give sound just a one
So
personally.
would I. It works for the movie as a whole. It kind of sets the tone, even though yeah, as you always say, it doesn't heighten the movie. So if you took away the score and replaced it with just like random score that kind of fits, it would be the kind of the same thing. I don't think the
Yeah,
score really matters,
it
but
doesn't really
it's not
matter.
what they're
It's a
going for.
documentary. It's not what
Yeah,
they're.
it's a
Yeah,
documentary. It's not what they're going for. So it wouldn't be great in that instance. I am perfectly fine with a one. I also watched the
yeah.
remastered version, so I can't speak to whether the theatrical version would have sounded better. I did tell anybody who's watching this movie, I did tell Mikiah put on subtitles because sometimes you can miss some of the background dialogue
That
that
did
is
help.
in there. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a bit like
that
Network.
definitely helped.
Network obviously is professionally made and professionally shot, so but kind of the lingo that occurs in Network, you can kind of miss it. Whereas if you're like reading in subtitles and they were like, "Oh, they said this. Oh, this means this," and that kind of thing. Like if you're not in the know, then you won't exactly pick up everything.
There's even a couple of times where like there was like in locker room conversations where the subtitles were like inaudible dialogue.
Yep.
And it was just somebody saying something like very quickly, and it just I
Can
guess they didn't want to put in the effort to
can
put in the
confirm I went to
subtitles
high
for
school. Half the shit I said was inaudible.
it. Yeah. But yeah, that was definitely a helpful thing because yeah, they're not trying to get filmic quality audio in this. That's not their
Oh,
goal.
I didn't
However,
realize this. So the subtitles were a remastered version of subtitles for me. So that
mm,
might have changed some things as well. They might have
yeah,
given more thought to it, especially if they improve the quality of the sound. They might have
yeah.
been able to
And
pick up
once
more
again, I was
things.
just watching it on Max, so
Yeah.
I don't know how much effort they put into that there. So,
I also
but
can I
yeah,
just say I
yeah,
appreciate that they gave everyone a voice. They gave
yes,
they gave the
everyone.
brother of I suppose it's William Gates's girlfriend's brother. They gave several interviews to, like, or
Yeah,
several minutes of screen time to. They didn't have to do that. Like they gave
no,
Curtis like 30 minutes of the movie, but they didn't. They didn't have to. They chose to because they're covering all their bases. They're covering everyone, and everyone's take
yeah,
on everything. So it's
yeah.
kind of
And
nice
there's the Arthur's best friend Shannon who ends up living with them for a
for a
while
while. Yeah,
is also like just in the mix of this movie
and you
too,
can
and you
tell
get
that
kind
he's
of
aged
yeah,
during the interview that they give because he's got a full like goatee, and you can definitely
yeah,
tell it's probably he's definitely either college years or after. So it's crazy that
mm-hmm.
they kind of come back to him like probably 3 years after they talked to him last. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and kind of like once again, it's another one of those things that they don't dwell on with him,
Nope.
but like his life stuff, because that's not he's not the focus of the movie for sure. He's just a part of Arthur's life.
But his relationship to Arthur is the subject of the
Yeah,
movie. So
yeah, and you get kind of a contrast with where they kind of end up going with their lives towards the end of the movie.
yeah.
Yeah,
Moving on to
but
genre. Obviously, it's a
documentary.
documentary. I
Yep.
I think this is like a quintessential documentary of the time. I think this is
Yes.
definitely one of the best documentaries I've seen, and it's got to be up there with one of the best documentaries of all time.
Yeah.
I just feel it
Absolutely.
has to be.
It just has to be. It's such a it captures everything so well as we've already kind of gushed about with this. Yeah, it's a great it's beyond a great documentary. It's a great film.
Mhm.
So, I that's an easy two,
Yep.
and it's yeah. Um, Impact. I don't know how we want to dissect impact here necessarily. I think among documentaries, if we're grading it on like a specific documentary scale, which we may well be, it's an easy two for
Yeah. This also
documentary.
still even if you just consider it with the rest of like movies of all time, this still had a huge impact on the Academy Awards.
It did. That's true too. That's a great point. Yeah, I think I'd be willing to jump up. I don't.
Even more so than probably a
Yeah,
couple best pictures.
yeah, like like Crash.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'd be willing to give this a two for impact, just because within the documentary sphere, there's very few that are talked about as much as this one, and have had as much impact as this one.
Yeah.
Overall, I don't think that there are that many documentaries that are going to be, unless you're talking about like Nanook of the North, which is a very controversial film, but very early film, considered to be the earliest documentary, despite how much of it is fabricated.
Hmm.
Unless we're talking about that, which is influential to film history, we're not going to find some like a documentary that I think is more significant in modern day films than Hoop Dreams. So I'd be willing to give it a 2
I
here.
think that's fair. There's some like probably like a Michael Moore documentary has had more impact, but
Yeah,
that's like
yeah,
because of its political nature and that kind of thing, and because of its
yes, yeah,
controversy. There's some documentaries that might be better shot or more well researched. Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Mr. Rogers one, I can point to. I
yeah.
love
That
that
was
documentary.
it
They
was
Shall
a
Not
great
Grow Old
documentary.
is an insane documentary because of Peter
Yeah,
Jackson's ability to grab old footage and colorize it to make it more relatable to today's times. The same thing with The Beatles Get Back. The Beatles Get Back is one of the least focused documentaries I've ever seen because they just throw
it's
everything that
so
they
much.
it's
Yeah,
so raw, the
it
the
is. That's
stuff
what's
that
so
they
great
throw
about it.
onto the
Yeah,
documentary. But because of the AI software that they use to colorize it and to like grab voices of the Beatles and like isolate them so that they can emphasize their voices and their mannerisms and everything like that. I think that's what makes a documentary like that influential. Not because of how
yeah.
structured it is, but because of how unfocused it is, because the Beatles themselves were pretty they weren't focused at all. They just made some great music over
No,
the
they're
span of 10 years.
musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just capturing that. The whole point of that documentary is just to capture what it was like to be behind the scenes with
Yeah.
the Beatles as they were writing some of their most famous songs, and it's incredible for it
Yep.
because it's just fascinating to watch those people.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, documentary 2
Yep.
for us here. Which brings our total to
It would be 9 out of 10, 18
9
out of
out of
20.
10, 18 out of 20, however we want to call it. That's what it is. Um,
I'll add,
this is
I'm going to
a
add it to the
fantastic
list as
film.
an 18 out of 20 because I think if we had taken into account what we could have qualified as writing, world building, that kind of thing, I think it would probably end up around the same.
It would be pretty.
It'd be
This would
pretty
be a pretty
close.
high up there film
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's just we've gushed about it a lot, so you already know that we think very highly of it
for good reason. This is a great
for good
film.
reason. It is. And yeah, if you're got the family together, and it's also because it's a documentary and long, sometimes you can just put it on, and then if you're with the family around Thanksgiving, I think it's a really nice watch, honestly.
This
Like
this
I understand why you picked it for
this
Thanksgiving
movie
week.
absolutely somehow has the least stakes and the most stakes imaginable,
Absolutely. Well, it's just human
which is
life.
crazy. It is human life, yeah.
It's just the day-to-day trials of life
It's
as
the
we know
smallest
it.
topic. It's just two individuals, and yet it's their entire
The
lives
biggest
before them.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, that I think unless you have something else you want to say about Hoop Dreams wraps up our conversation there.
Nope, I'm good. Like I said, it speaks for itself. All I can do is really
Yeah,
just emphasize it.
yeah, this will be our nice short episode
Short
for
short
us.
episode for Thanksgiving.
Yes, yes. That way we can
Go
just get
talk
on with the
politics with the
holidays.
family. Listen to your crazy uncles,
Yeah, no,
children.
please do not talk politics with me. We will not be discussing. But yeah. So next week I have a little treat for us. Um in that I told you last week that I will be going further back than we have gone thus far in our film history. And this is a film that was actually gifted to me on my birthday this year, and I haven't watched it yet. So this will be my first time watching it.
And I guarantee
But
you I have not seen this movie.
it is, yes, it's a 1930s film directed by Michael Curtis, who you might know as the director of Casablanca.
I gotcha.
And 1938, The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn.
Ah, nice.
So it is a color picture before we had Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz the following year. So yeah, I'm very excited to watch it. I felt like Robin Hood always gives me some fall vibes. So, and same with classic films. I just kind of want to like cozy up and watch like some classic film that I've never seen before. So that'll be next week's watch.
Okay.
And yeah, but that'll do it for us this week on Great American Movie Review. We are an audio show, so if you prefer to listen to us, we're also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can take us on the go. But otherwise, check us out on social media. Give us a like, maybe subscribe if you like this, comment if you have any thoughts on the movie or just the episode. We'd love to hear it, but that'll do it for us this week, and we'll see you at the movies.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.